Hey, what is going on, guys? This is SMEB Reviews, and today, welcome back to the second installment of my new series, Album Diaries. In this series, we take albums that I have listened to for years, ones I have a deep personal connection to, talk about them, analyze them, discuss them, review them, and then just throw in some personal anecdotes, some stories that I have along with it. And honestly, not always will this be albums that I'm absolutely in love with, as you will see with this episode. So, last time we talked about Songs of Innocence by U2, and this time we will be talking about the third studio album from Fitz and the Tantrums, their self-titled album. Let's get to it. Alright, so a lot of the personal anecdotes with this album may be more focused towards the band, though this album holds some relevance, because this album was the newest release when I found out about Fitz and the Tantrums. What happened? So let me tell the story about how I even discovered Fitz and the Tantrums. So, before in the past, I've briefly discussed how at one point I used to be this classic rock elitist sort of person, where I believed that typically the best music came from the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the rock genre. And honestly, I wasn't too discriminatory past that. It could be anything in that genre. There were obviously my favorites and ones I didn't like as much, but it's not like I liked synth or the more hard rock stuff. It was all what I liked. And one day, my friend and I were listening to music, and she showed me a song that I'm actually not going to discuss now because it may come up in a future episode of this, but that band became one of my favorite bands of all time, the band that she showed me. And so I was really wanting to see them live, so I just happened to look up, hey, what are their tour dates? Saw that they were playing about 4 hours from me in a music festival. Now, I'm going to say right now, this music festival was absolutely stacked with excellent indie alternative artists. At the time, I hadn't listened to any of these artists, but looking back, man, was it a great set and a great lineup. But one of the headliners for that show was Fitz and the Tantrums. Now, I ended up not being able to go to that show because I couldn't get a way down there, and I didn't have anyone to go with, so I was unable to actually make it to the show. But because of it, I looked up a couple artists, some of the bigger names, some of the ones that sounded familiar that I'd maybe heard before, and I looked them up, and I just played a couple of their songs. Cage the Elephant's one that I discovered because of that, and as I said, Fitz and the Tantrums. So I went onto their page, clicked on the newest top song on their Spotify page, and listened to it, and absolutely fell in love. So I'm going to spoil it and say that song was Handclap, the only single off of this album. And I loved it, and I know a lot of people may have some mixed feelings about it, so while we're at it, let's just discuss Handclap. So Handclap is definitely that party anthem, pump-up sort of sound. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. It doesn't have an actual substance. It's more just a party track. But that being said, it's different. And while I said it doesn't have any substance, that's more in the lyrical content. Because back in 2016, when this album came out, we had a hit with a bass line, we had a hit with a saxophone, and that's not that common. I mean, let's be real. It was a true bass guitar line. Like I said, there was a saxophone solo, and while, yes, I will perfectly admit that it is very poppy, very danceable, very, very lyrically empty, you gotta admit, it was kind of an impressive sleeper hit that did grow on the charts, and by mid-2017, it was, possibly even later than that, it had gotten pretty far up the charts. But because of that, and me looking up this band, I heard that song and fell in love, because it was different. It had some true rock edge, though it was definitely still a fun dance pop track. And I think that song really embodies this album as a whole. Because this album is not one of lyrical substance. It has some really great instrumentation at times. I'm not going to deny it. Honestly, even re-listening to it, I was frequently shocked and just would sit there and go, I don't even remember this part from this song, because it was just a certain instrument doing a certain thing that I was really impressed with. And this is an album I constantly revisit. And today, really looking at it for this review, I was impressed. Now, as I said, it's still just supposed to be fun. I'm not going to say that this is like the best album of all time. And that's where this album does stray from Songs of Innocence, because I do believe that that album was a great, incredible album. This album, I don't. If I put on those critic goggles and really look at it, it's a good album. It's passable, but it's not great. But for me personally, and that this is part of what this series is about, this album is so catchy and so fun and just brings back a lot of good memories for me. So, one of those memories actually ended up becoming whenever I ended up seeing this band. So I didn't actually go to that music festival, but they were doing a solo tour, and I believe they ended up coming to around me in just a couple months after that, maybe even just a month. I'm pretty sure it was the same summer. And so I ended up getting a friend to load up with me, and we drove down to this concert. And I was absolutely stoked. I had been listening to them, and I got really excited for this show. Ends up the day before I end up getting sick. Really sick. And this is totally unrelated to the band, but another story that I like to tell, or I want to tell, because as I said, this show is to talk about the album and memories I have with this band and this album. So, while we were going down there, I got really nauseous, started feeling really sick, and ended up feeling terrible. We went really early because it was a general admission show, and we ended up waiting outside in the summer heat for like an hour, and then had to wait inside for another hour, and then an opening act, and then time until the band actually got on. I felt miserable, but once the band came on, it all went away because they put on an incredible live show. And despite the fact that some people may not absolutely love their music, if you have any kind of taste for it and you liked it at all, I really do recommend seeing them live. They have so much energy and passion. And heck, the lead singer, Michael Fitzpatrick, is about 47, I believe. I'm not quite sure. I think it's 47 or 48. And he has a ton of energy. It's incredible. He is a great performer live. I do believe that. And he still has a good voice, because in this album, you hear a lot of, vocal modulation, and not necessarily like auto-tune, but just effects put on his voice. But he doesn't really need it. He can hit most of the pitches without any help. So, why am I talking about all of these stories just about the band whenever I'm really just trying to review their third album? Not their first, not their second, not their only album, their third album. Well, primarily it's because this is the album that I got into them with. I heard Handclap. This was before it really blew up as a song. I hadn't heard it at the time. I just happened to discover the band and liked them as the song was getting more popular. But this was the one that I really started to listen to. At the current moment, they have another album coming out, and I believe I'm not going to like it that much, though I will review it when it comes out. I just haven't really liked the singles. This is my least favorite album. I prefer both of their other albums, specifically their first album, which is a neo-soul project. It's a great album, and not at all what you expect from this band. But this album does end up becoming my least favorite album of theirs. But it's the one that got me into them. And as I said, so many great memories, because I remember the concert, and I remember some other events that I will talk about in a little bit. So let's go a little bit more into the actual music here. So we have some songs that are genuinely great. I'm not going to say that all of these songs lack any kind of substance, because I feel like Walking Target, it's got this really funky, bouncing bass line that I absolutely love. A Place for Us is very familiar, very nostalgic sounding, and I really do like it. We have songs like Tricky, which is another pretty catchy song. Probably not one of the absolute highlights, but very catchy. Run It is probably one of my other favorites. Burn It Down. Again, all of these songs are so catchy and so memorable. They really do get stuck in your head. And honestly, there's probably only 2 tracks that I'm not too fond of. One of them's Complicated, as it's supposed to be this sexy sort of R&B mixed with indie sound. It really doesn't quite work too well. It's not awful. It just doesn't quite work. But the energy that they have when they perform it live is actually still pretty good. And then the worst song on here, which is Fade Back. Fade Back just is really bare bones and boring. Lyrically, and just musically. As I said, a lot of these songs will have really nice synthesizers or saxophone or bass or just really great vocals, because the vocals from both Noel Scaggs and Michael Fitzpatrick cannot be understated. Both singers are incredible. They have some moments where they have a harder time. Like, I feel like Get Right Back is a song where Fitz doesn't quite hit his pitches, but you know what? Honestly, it still sounds okay. That being said, as I said, Fade Back, it just doesn't have anything interesting, not good instrumentation or vocals. And I feel like part of that's because of the production, which the production itself was done by Michael Fitzpatrick. And he just didn't have much experience being a producer. I don't think he's produced much of their music in the past, at least not more than a song. And so he just didn't have much experience with it. And so that's why it's one of the weaker tracks. There's one song on here that is also probably one of the lyrically most uninteresting, most uninspired tracks, and that's Roll Up. Roll Up has this, I don't even know what you'd call it, just a synthesizer, I guess, but it has this line at the beginning, and then we get the saxophone that also joins it. And the saxophone, I'll admit, is really nice. I really like it. It's super catchy. It's one of those fist-pumping sort of songs, and it builds and builds, and this is a song where they knew how to build that energy all the way. Because in Handclap, we get it sort of like it starts to build, and it drops down a little bit. We start climbing the mountain, and then we go down a little bit before we shoot back up. This song successfully builds that tension the whole way until you get to the very top. And honestly, even then, it doesn't feel like an abrupt stop when you start going back down the hill and start again. It really does work. As I said, it's pretty much just about, it's just a song about, it's about nothing. The main lyrics are, roll up, come get your love. And it doesn't have much substance. Most of it does not have much substance. But this is one that, just another memory of mine. Whenever they play it live, they have this dance move. It comes in a little right before the chorus, and then when the chorus hits, it just explodes, and they have another dance move. I have this distinct memory. I love nature and animals, and one day, some of my friends loaded up in a car, and we all drove out to see this nature preserve. And when we were there, we ended up driving back, listening to this song full blast, and it's a really good memory. Some of my best friends, Alyssa was in that group, which, if any of you guys know, is my girlfriend, and it's a great memory for me, and I absolutely love it. I could keep going about a lot of this track listing, but I feel like a lot of it stands, in that you get really interesting instrumentation with just catchy songs. And so if you're looking for something with substance, don't come to this album. You are looking in the wrong place, absolutely. But, if you wanted to hear something a little different, if you're wanting pop with something a little different about it, something a little interesting, honestly, I recommend this. It's an album where you hear something new, because while it's definitely pop, how much pop has saxophone? Honestly, how much pop do you know that has saxophone in it? And I think that that's something awesome about this release. Okay, I am nearing the end, because I feel like while I said I go in depth on these albums, this one's not one to analyze. It's the kind that's a fun album. And I'm going to be absolutely critical of it. Whenever I give a rating, it's with everything taken into account, with those critic goggles on. But I can't help but say that this is a fun album. This is one of those albums I just like to throw on, and it really just works. It's a fun, enjoyable album that I will listen to, even though it has lots and lots of shortcomings. So, just a couple things to wrap up. First fun fact, the first actually successful video I had on this channel was a concert review of One Republic with Fitz and the Tantrums and James Arthur. That was one of the first videos that kind of got big for me. I think it got to about 400 views, which at the time was huge, as most of mine weren't really even cracking 100. I don't know if any had at that point, so that was really awesome for me. Following that, even the video for their new single that they had come out, which was a deluxe edition to it was added onto the deluxe edition of this album. Fool also was a pretty successful video for me. That one did really well too. And so this band's actually done really well for me. And I just, that's awesome. I'm glad that I've had people that have come to my channel because of this band, a band that I do actually really love. I'd love to talk about some of their older stuff, but I felt like this one more embodied what about this band made me fall in love. Because their first album and their second album are both incredible. I think their first album's their best, and I'd give it at least a 9. It's a great album. I love it. But it's not what made me fall in love with this band. It was my second exposure to them, and it's what made me really, really dig in and really find out more about the people in the band, about the songwriting, really become a true fan. But this album is the whole reason I even know they exist. This album deserved the credit. The one that I should have talked about, even though it's not my favorite. It's far from it. So, at that note, I'm going to wrap it up. This is an album that is absolutely my fun album. It has its weaknesses, and I know that. But when you have an album that's a pop album from an indie band that the lead single gets to like 60 on the Hot 100, that's pretty impressive and good for them. I like I said, I'm very nervous about this upcoming album. I can't wait to talk about it, but I'm not looking forward to it at the moment. That being said, this album has a lot of great memories just because of what it did for me and the band, because I didn't even listen to any of their other albums whenever I went to see them live. This was the only album I knew. And they primarily played stuff from this album, but this album started the whole thing. It started a lot of why I got into modern music, and really I'm here why I'm here. Minus the band that I looked up to see their concert dates and then found this band. That's the true band that started it, but I feel like this band helped perpetuate it. So ultimately, yes, it's weak at times. I'm still going to give it a mediocre album or review. I feel like it really does deserve about a 6.5 out of 10. What do you guys think of this album? Please let me know. Do you have any memories with this album? I mean, if you have listened to this band, what's the first thing you heard? Was Handclap your first exposure? Was it because of the radio? Did you just happen to hear it? What happened? How did you find out about Fitz and the Tantrums? Or if you haven't, go look them up. And like I said, probably start with their first album and work your way up. Because it gets more and more poppy. Well, heck, maybe start with the last one, because they'll only get better and more substantial as you start with the third, then go to the second, then go to the first. But I only say start with the first so you don't get turned off, because picking up the pieces, their first album is great. Besides that, thank you guys for watching this video. It really does mean a lot to me, and I will see you guys later.